So this first presentation I'm actually in with Raul here, who also works with me at Parity Technologies on a lot of the governance engagement with the community and ensuring that things run smoothly. I've given a bit of an introduction of myself already. I'll skip that for time's sake here, so we can catch up on time a little, and talk a little bit about our experience in governance development, both in blockchains and in the world to date. So we have, as a human race, been exploring research and development in governance and social coordination for thousands of years. This is something we should not forget. There's a lot of uncertainty or questioning of the value of stakeholder-driven governance in the blockchain world, and especially Bitcoin and Ethereum, because of this idea that these systems should be completely trustless and completely sort of uncontrolled by any group of people and purely protocol-driven governance. And while there is some value to that, and I think we capture that value with Polkadot's governance, we understand this fact that humanity is actually quite good, despite what some people might see as the current state of things in world governance. We are quite good at the end of the day in terms of understanding the systems and protocols and procedures that we use to engage with each other and come to decisions that are optimal for groups, societies, and civilizations. And at its core, blockchains are these trust mechanisms that allow us to engage with each other in a decentralized manner. So this formula, this sort of idea of governance being a combination of agency and upgradability, was introduced by Gav a couple months ago, I think towards the beginning of the summer, actually, in a presentation when he was talking about Polkadot governance. This idea that, or blockchain governance generally, this idea that you can't have strong, formalized, legitimate governance without a formalized path for the upgrades that the community decides on to be executed, and b, agency in the system. So this means everyone who's participating in this stakeholder-driven governance feels like their voice is being heard to the extent that it's possible. So we want to, over the course of this presentation, come back to this idea that governance is this mix of agency and upgradability, because blockchain networks are trustless social coordination mechanisms, and we need to be able to amend the constitution of trust that they endow. So this means both the rules by which these protocols are governed, and also the sort of meta set of rules that establish how those rules are established, which is what Raul is going to get into a bit, discussing Polkadot's relay chain governance. I do want to touch on a little bit this idea of like what makes a network versus a protocol. And it really is this combination of the protocol, which is the cold tech, this is the code that's running on machines around the world, has to be combined with people, us, the community here, talking about Polkadot. It only really becomes a strong network. You really only get these network effects when you combine a strong technical underpinning with people who have the trust that in that code, in that vision, in that social contract, and you really then get what I would call a real decentralized network. So a couple of examples of our experience in blockchain governance. Obviously, the Parity Technologies team was very, very involved very early on in Ethereum, going back to obviously Gav building the first Ethereum testnet and clients. And the first big major crisis of Ethereum's governance was the DAO hack. And despite it being messy and completely managed off chain, this was the first really major governance decision taken by a decentralized network, when there was a decision to fork the chain to ensure that the DAO hacker couldn't get access to all the funds within this 30-day period. Now, the fact remains that because Ethereum doesn't have formalized on-chain governance, there was a fork, and a significant amount of the community broke off and formed Ethereum Classic, which is fairly detrimental and could be more detrimental long-term if this continues to happen to the network effects of a decentralized network. We've also seen some issues in Bitcoin, for example. I know the very early, one of the first sort of governance debates in the Bitcoin community was about block size and being able to scale. And you see this chart here of all the different forks and splinters of Bitcoin that have happened over the years, because it relies on fairly informal fork choice governance that puts the onus on the majority to continue the strength of their community, and makes it very easy for minorities to fork off over in some cases, potentially fairly small disagreements. And if we want these networks to survive and proliferate over time, we need to figure out a way to ensure that when there are contentious issues and we do need to upgrade the chain, we can all come to consensus about those changes without sort of destroying the community that we've worked so hard to build. So now I'd like to turn it over to Raul so we can get into a bit of what we mean by sort of formalized on-chain governance in Polkadot.
Thanks, Peter. So I'm going to give you a high level on Polkadot. And for that, I want you to remember two things. The first one is, as Peter said, part of the equation to create good governance on chain has to do with agency, right? And agency is a concept that's intrinsically related to the automatic enactment feature that Polkadot allows on chain. And the second element I want you to remember is that, as Rob Habermeyer said previously today, Polkadot is a blockchain of blockchains, right? So we have different agents interacting on the on-chain governance design together and voting on the outcome of their discussion. So we need a transparent and sophisticated process for automatic change enactment, right? So this gives agency to the network. And we have that right now live on Polkadot network. So we have an on-chain governance system on Polkadot that allows active users to propose changes via proposals, that allows token holders to have ultimate control over the network, and also allows token holders to form collectives, which is a very, very interesting feature on the on-chain governance side on Polkadot's, and also elect representatives. So let's just jump into it. Polkadot's design allows stakeholders to express their wishes on chain, right? And this is expressed on chain, and the network is upgraded on chain without forking, as Peter mentioned. How do they change the network? How do we propose new changes? Through proposals. So proposals have the power to automatically change the network. And these proposals comes from collectives. The collectives are bodies on the on-chain governance design that allow the network to protect passive users from large token holders. At the moment, and I say at the moment because of course this can be changed via the on-chain governance design, we count with 3 collectives on Polkadot network. So it's a 3-cameral system as we talk about, as we define it. The first one I want to talk about is the console. The console should be understood as the executive body of Polkadot network, right? And it represents passive stakeholders, proposes changes, and also cancels dangerous proposals. So how does it come to life on Polkadot network? Dot holders vote on different candidates that want to enter the console. The election uses the same fragment process as validator selections. And on the console, and this is very important, 1 member equals 1 vote. The fact that 1 member equals 1 vote is not by accident, right? The collective aims to make it hard for large dot holders to exercise undue power on the console. So if a large dot holder has a seat on the console, their vote only counts for 1 in this particular collective. It's important to understand also that the console is not permanent. At the moment, we have 13 members on Polkadot network, but the seats rotate every 7 days. So through fragment process, the system selects the most backed configuration every 7 days, and the console rotates each period of time. The second collective I want to talk about that works in a very coordinated way with the console is the technical committee. The technical committee is composed of the teams that have successfully implemented either a Polkadot runtime or a Polkadot host. And why do they work coordinated with the Polkadot console? Because the technical committee cannot really propose changes or submit a proposal to the network. But when the console proposes an emergency motion to take care of an issue the network has, and the console approves this motion and it passes to external queue in order to be voted by the community, the technical committee can fast-track these proposals in order to reduce the time being voted on referenda queue. So that's why we define the technical committee as the last line of defense against against software errors. Something I miss saying about the console also is a very important feature, as Bjorn said before today on Polkadot Decoded, is that the console is also the guardian of the Treasury, right? So the Treasury is a pot of funds that belongs to the Polkadot community as a whole, but that is guarded by the console. So the console ultimately decides how to spend these funds, right? But any token holder can submit a proposal to be voted by the console. At the moment, we have 3 spending mechanisms: spending proposals, tips, and bounties mechanisms. The spending proposals is like, let's call it the more traditional mechanism, and it's similar to a grant program in which a team proposes a project to be funded by the Treasury, and the console votes on the projects and then review and evaluates and pays out in the end. Tips are rewards that we give to DOT holders and community members for building or developing something that is awesome that benefits the network as a whole. So we have from video tutorials to wikis to translations to even pottery, for example, in Kusama network. And then the bounties mechanism is our newest mechanism. And different to spending proposals, bounties allows the console to delegate the power of review, evaluation, and payment of part of the Treasury for a project to a curator. So these curators are experts in the topics the bounty touches, and this allows the console to delegate their responsibility to an expert, because of course console members cannot have expertise on all of the topics. So this particular mechanism comes in the right place for a network that is very diverse and dynamic. So after the console and the technical committee that work in a very coordinated way, we have a third collective in which all DOT holders are part of, and this is the democracy module. The democracy module is particularly important because this collective allows any DOT holder to command the changes on the network and to submit proposals for change, okay? So the majority can command the network every 28 days by passing proposals on referenda queue. Any DOT holder can submit a proposal, and any DOT holder can vote on this public referenda. But the trick is that voting comes with conviction. So what does it mean? It means that if I'm a small token holder, I can increase my voting power by committing to lock my tokens for longer periods of time. If I commit to lock my tokens for a longer period of time, my vote will count more, and my vote and voice can be louder on the network. Of course, public referenda has a 2-stage mechanism. The first one is when a proposal comes into play, users can second these proposals, and the proposal with the highest amount of funded support passes to referenda queue for all DOT holders to vote. So on this diagram, we can see the interaction between the 3 collectives, right? We have on the left the DOT holders, and then on the right we have the console and the technical committee working in a coordinated way. We can see that there are 2 queues, right? We have public proposals on one side, in which the most sponsors selected for referenda periodically pass to the public referenda queue. And then the console has its own queue, the motion queue, that can pass after, if it's an external motion, to the public referenda queue in order to be voted by all DOT holders. The technical committee is the one fast-tracking proposals in order not to be voted for 28 days in case of an emergency, but for being voted for less than that, okay? So how do these collectives make changes on the network? They make changes on the network through proposals. And this is the essence of the automatic change enactment, right? Because they originate from DOT holders and the console, or as a result of an enactment of another proposal, right? But only one proposal can exist on referenda queue for a voting period. Each voting period is 28 days. So the governance system will alternate between console proposals and public or democracy module proposals in order to take into account all of these proposals. So in general, only one proposal gets voted per voting period, with the exception of fast-track proposals by the technical committee. Now, this is very interesting. There's a very interesting element when it comes to voting public referenda, because the system uses an adaptive quorum biasing mechanism. that takes into account 3 different scenarios. Why this is important? Because depending on from where the public referenda is coming from where the proposal is coming from, there will be different metrics to take into account the voting and the result of the proposal. If the proposal is coming from the public, from dot holders in public referenda, then instantly the metric will have a positive turnout bias. What this means is that if there is a small amount of dot holders voting for this, we will need a supermajority approve in order for the proposal to pass. But as long as the amount of dot holders voting increases, then it will slowly change from a supermajority approve to a simple majority approve. If the proposal comes from the council in complete agreement, which means unanimity, then the metric in order to pass the proposal is a negative turnout bias. What does this mean? This means that we need a supermajority against the proposal in order not to pass, okay? And if the proposal comes from the council with a majority agreement, not by unanimity, then we simply need simple majority, all right? Why is this important? This is important because the design favors stability and high discussion on controversial proposals. So by default, the bigger the turnout, the fewer A's needed to pass, right? So it transitions from absolute to simple majority. If there is a low turnout, this requires a supermajority to pass. So the design favors stability. So the lower the turnout, the higher the percentage needed to pass. And a full turnout requires only a simple majority to pass. So all of these proposals coming either from council or from dot holders, they're executed without human interference. And this is what we discuss when we discuss automatic enactment. So this makes those in power, those who have voted for a particular proposal, accountable for their decisions. How? Because by default, users who voted for a past proposal, they must log the tokens up until the proposal's enactment, which in general is 20 days later. So at the time of the enactment period, Polkadot will execute the proposal without human action or interference. This is what we call autonomous enactment or automatic enactment on the network. So to end, after this really fast explanation of a 3-cameral system on Polkadot network, what on-chain governance means for Polkadot. So what this means for Polkadot is basically an on-chain governance and autonomous enactment systems that give token holders agency. The vehicle to express their opinion, the vehicle to change the network as they wish. Polkadot's governance also provides several mechanisms to effect this change. So it's a transparent and open voting system that allows people's decision to be binding and held people accountable for what they voted. And at the end, then, Polkadot, as we said before, is a united network of sovereign systems, which needs an on-chain governance mechanism in order to enact change on the network. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you very much, Raul. So now we've talked a bit about the need for governance and a lot of the design choices that we made in the actual on-chain enactment and formalization of these voting procedures. Obviously, probably it is the most complex on-chain governance system in Web 3.0, and it's absolutely necessary in order to ensure the agency that stakeholders have over the system. But before we all go to the voting box and cast our vote, obviously there's a need for the social coordination layer before that, so people can discuss potentially contentious issues or even non-contentious issues, and just stay up to date with the sort of course of action and governance, the docket sometimes, as it's called in sort of nation state governance. So there's a couple of resources out there in order for people to engage in governance. The first being Polkassembly, which is a governance explorer and engagement tool for Polkadot governance, where you're actually able to log in using your Polkadot or Kusama account. So this is a Web3 first governance interface where your discussion and then your vote is tied to your on-chain account, and your account on Polkassembly is tied to your identity on-chain, which is obviously very exciting and continually pushing us towards this Web3 future. Obviously not wanting to be centralized, there's also other solutions out there. The other one being built by Commonwealth, which is the team also behind Edgeware, is a governance interface and explorer, but for any substrate-based chain. So there's a number of substrate-based chains on Commonwealth Commonwealth, in addition to several other Web3 communities are starting to use Commonwealth to engage in the sort of social consensus layer before the on-chain vote for their ultimate decisions and upgrades. Interestingly, one of the things we're working on with the Commonwealth team is creating some interoperability between Polka Assembly and Commonwealth so that the conversations sync up and one if you're using one or the other, you do understand the full scope of the conversation and it isn't fragmented, a lot like we've seen in Ethereum governance where conversations happen all over the place and it takes someone a lot more time and effort to understand the full scope of what's going on in governance and who's saying what and where things are going. So I think we're a little bit behind on time. We may have one or two questions. I think, Raul, one good one might be what it takes to be a council member. Who can be a council member and how do you become a council member?
Any dot holder can be a council member. You can submit your candidacy on Polkadot.js apps, for example. Any dot council can definitely be a council member. We have many different councilors representing different stakeholders. We have people representing validators, nominators, companies that are part of the ecosystem, other organizations, people representing passive stakeholders. So anyone can be a member. Just go to the governance section of Polkadot.js apps and you submit your candidacy, and then it's time for lobbying and cast for votes because dot holders need to vote for you. So make sure you go to Polk Assembly, you go to our direction channels on Discord or on Element, and advertise your candidacies for other dot holders to vote for you.
Yeah, that raises the point where, I don't want to call them political parties because that sort of scares everyone off. Yeah. But we are starting to see these sort of natural stakeholder groups align and coordinate around what they particularly want to see in Polkadot's future. Actually, right now, there's an alliance being formed by several of the teams in the DeFi space within Polkadot. And I could absolutely see that sort of Polkadot DeFi alliance becoming like pursuing a council seat, or generally just ensuring that their aligned members are aligned on certain decisions that may negatively or positively impact the DeFi ecosystem on Polkadot. And you could see that applied to staking communities. You could see that applied to just general enthusiast dot holder communities. So I'm really excited to see the growth of these factions and stakeholder groups and how they engage in governance both together. And I'm excited to see the first conflict because that's obviously going to happen at some point. Awesome. Thank you, Raul. We're going to close the session and jump into the next one. We'll see you all over there.
Thank you. See you soon.